suddenly there is this new thing, the BEE Act. Suddenly you have to make decisions based on race. You have to now qualify every commercial decision that you make, because the BEE Act covers many kind of areas. It covers your suppliers. Who are your suppliers? It covers your board, who is in control of your board. It covers your shareholding. So whenever you make any kind of economic decision, you have to take into account what is your BEE score going to be. I encourage your listeners to follow me on my social media platforms. I think start at my website. That's martinvanstaden, all one word.com. Follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. That is Martin_ASFL. And also please follow the work of the Free Market.
The Beyond Africa podcast. Welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast, the only platform where experts share their views on African issues. Martin van Staden, you're welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast. You are the head of policy at the Free Market Foundation, and you are the editor of the Index of Race Laws in South Africa. Am I correct?
Yes. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. It's always difficult to have researchers and authors like you come on the program because you're always looking for information. But we're happy that you've gotten some information and you are ready to share that information with us. When we look at South Africa, especially those of us from around Africa, we know that there are two main races, the black and the white. And we all know the history of the apartheid and the transition in 1994. Recently, we've been hearing about xenophobic attacks on blacks, other Africans who are in South Africa, but we hardly ever heard of the disparity between the blacks and the whites. But you took time to study the laws in South Africa. You went back in time, right until today, to come out with a historical perspective of race-based laws. Can you give us a brief synopsis into that?
Yes. So, as you said, South Africa has a very well-known record in the world as a country with an intensely racialized legal environment or legal system. And a few years ago, when I was at the Institute of Race Relations, I found it quite interesting that in all of South Africa's history since 1910, when the unit that we know as South Africa today was created, that in all that time there was no comprehensive record of the race laws that everyone is talking about, from the apartheid era race laws, and now recently kind of the post-apartheid era, where of course race law has continued and everyone kind of in South Africa at least was aware of this, and investors from abroad were aware of this. And it was odd that this wasn't recorded. And that's what the Index of Race Law ultimately was directed at. And that is to be a public interest initiative to show South Africans, yes, but also the world, that there is still a phenomenon of race law in this country. And very briefly, the findings that kind of are the current state of research. It's always a work in progress. It's always new research comes to light. But the current state of the research is that since 1910, again, when the Union of South Africa was established, 317, so 317 acts of parliament were adopted that in some way or another makes someone's race or ethnicity or skin color legally relevant. Now, of that 317, 117 were adopted since 1994, when South Africa became a majoritarian democracy. And that is about 37% of the total number of race laws that South Africa has always had. And kind of total currently, the number of race laws that are in operation, legally operative, is around 142. So that's kind of the big numbers that a lot of people are talking about. And now in the US as well, a lot of people are taking an interest in race law in South Africa. But that is what we've discovered with the index. And it's still work in progress. There's going to be more laws that we discover that were missed and so on. But these are basically the numbers and the regions in which you can expect to find that is the state of South African race law.
Hello, let me interrupt you. Kindly like, subscribe, and share. That is the best way to keep us going. My little squirrel over here tells me you need to subscribe, like, and share. Do you agree with the squirrel? Please do, and let others know what is happening here. Thank you.
That sounds interesting as a research project. And I was going to ask if the objective of this is just education or advocacy. Why did you have to go into this area that appears to be controversial in today's world?
Yes, so there's two things. The Institute of Race Relations has a race law project, and that is what the index is a part of. That is very much a normative advocacy based entity because the Institute of Race Relations was founded in 1929 as a non-racial, classically liberal institution, and it remains a non-racial, classically liberal institution to this day. It has always opposed race law right through the apartheid era, and it opposes race law today. And in that sense, the IRR, the Institute of Race Relations, is advocating for a deracialization of South African law. It recently published its No More Race Laws bill, which is a proposal to Parliament to deracialize South African law and make it so that the law applies equally to everyone and to the benefit of everyone. So the IRR has an advocacy interest there. However, there is another dimension to that, and this is the index. The index of race law, as the table, the data set, is a completely neutral educational instrument. The index of race law does not pass any judgment on whether a given piece of race law is good, bad, harmful, beneficial, detrimental, or any of that. If you look at the index, you will see that it only mentions the act's name, the year it was adopted in, the act number, the nature of its race provision. Is it an originally racial provision? Was it subsequently racialized? Or has it been deracialized and made a non-race law, but historically has been a race law? And when was it adopted, during which era, the pre-democratic era or the current democratic era? And this index is an educational tool because it's necessary to know this. If you oppose race law or if you favor race law, somewhere in a country with a developed legal system like South Africa's, a very developed legal system, the record must be there about what's the state of our legal categories. I mean, if you go to a fishing consultancy, for instance, and you ask them what are the laws governing fishing in South Africa, they will give you a list of it, and that is educational. And here we have it with race law. What are the laws in South Africa that govern race? What are the laws that make race relevant? And there is that. So that is the neutral part of the exercise. As far as all the numbers are concerned, the numbers haven't been jimmied to say that, there's even more race laws. In fact, I think I have gone out of my way, and I think this is the position that the IRR shares, is to be conservative in what we consider to be race law. For instance, the newest act that is very controversial in South Africa is the Expropriation Act, deals with land and property rights. Now, there is a question, is this a race law? Now, if you read the text of the act, it doesn't make any reference to race, but it does have that.
We'll pay some attention to the Expropriation Act later on. But I
Yes, I just want to make the point that we did not record it as a race law. We were conservative, so it's, if anything, we are underreporting the number of race laws. So this is not about jimmying the numbers and making it appear like there is a bigger race law problem than there currently is. So it's very much intended to be a neutral resource.
Let me shoot on that. In legal interpretation, that is called the facial meaning of the law and the interpretative meaning of the law. So you're saying that you focused only on those laws that on the face mention race. Is that what you're saying here?
No. So our minds were certainly applied to each law. So one of the critiques of the index of race law is that we did a control F or a search function on all race law and we typed in black and white or race, ethnicity. And if we got a hit, we counted it as a race law. No, that's nonsense. That is not how it works. The question is, does the law operationalize someone's race, ethnicity, or skin color? That means we read the provisions of the act and read them in context of the act and in context certainly of how the law has been kind of applied in South Africa, and that those are race laws. It's not just on its face, it mentions race, therefore it's a race law. There are some acts that mention race, for instance, in their preambles or in their kind of their long titles. And then you'll find that in the act itself, there is no operationalized racial provision. That is not a race law because it's not in law. It's just a kind of throat clearing exercise in the preamble of the act that doesn't have any real effect in legal practice. So no, each act was considered on its merits, and each provision, as far as we can, there's always room for mistake, but as far as we can, each provision was confirmed to be an actual racial provision and not just a provision in which the word black or the word white and white phosphorus appears. It's an actual racial provision.
You did not do an analysis of those particular provisions. One of the critiques said the absence of an analysis to determine how race-based those provisions are is one of the reasons most people would not agree that there are 142 race-based laws in South Africa.
Yes, that is one of the critiques. Firstly, I think it's not important that people agree. I mean, this is a factual record. If they disagree, that's fine. But this is not, as far as I'm concerned, this is not a debate. It's a data set. And they can go and do their own analyses. They can develop their own data sets, and that's fine as long as it contributes to the body of research. But the reason that the index doesn't currently specify the provisions is because we used for-profit database tools like Sabinet, Juta, and so on, and we can't copy from that's a paid for service. But we are in the process, and I hope that by the end of the year, we will be able, in the index, in the table, to specify which provisions are the triggering provisions for inclusion in the index. Now, more than that, I don't think we'll be able to do. The index doesn't exist to convince people that the act is racial. They can go and do their own research afterwards if they disagree, because we will be specifying the provisions. Again, this is not a matter of one of the big issues has been that people say that these laws are for redress, so they have a good intention, whatever that might be, and therefore it cannot qualify as. Now, that is not a question that the index of race law is ever going to go into. Its purpose is to record acts of parliament currently. In the future, it will look at regulations and so forth, but currently acts of parliament that operationalize your race. It does not matter what the intention was, why your race is being operationalized, but only that it is racialized. So that's something the index will specifically avoid, and it must avoid if it hopes to be a resource for everyone in the debate to utilize as perhaps the starting point of their inquiry.
Yeah, I'm still trying to pin my finger on the objective. Is it to how race laws fared between the apartheid regime and the democratic regime? Are you comparing the two? I'm trying to pin my finger to understand the foundational objective of this exercise.
Yeah, it's a record of race laws. That is the objective is to inform. The Institute of Race Relations in 1949, it published its first review of racial legislation. 1976, it published I believe the act was called the book was called Laws Affecting Race Relations in South Africa. It was a compilation of the various laws that operationalize people's race. This has been a public interest initiative that the Institute of Race Relations has done since the apartheid years. And that is to show that the law, which by default, but the common law default is that the law is a non-racial institution. This is the way that the law has been racialized by statute. And this is something the IRR has done for many years, and it's something that the IRR will continue to do, because if you are the Institute of Race Relations in South Africa, you would be remiss. You would be very remiss to not record the instances of parliament, which happily takes non-racial tax money to fund itself. You would be remiss to not show in what ways that institution is continuing to racialize the legal environment. So it's an information, it's a tool of informing the public and investors and so forth about what the state of the law in South Africa is. Will the law take into account how you were born? And the answer is yes, it will take into account how you were born, what the color of your skin was. And that is what this index ultimately hopes to show. And it doesn't matter if you agree. Many people are saying that the law must take that into account. The law must see you born as a black person or as a white person. And that's fine. People must make that argument. But it does not mean that the law is non-racial just because you agree with it. The law is racial.
Now, listening to you, I'm understanding why the critiques may be addressing something else and not the objective of this index. You are just stating what is as race-based, but they are looking at the intentions of your publication and trying to interpret why you are publishing this index. Is that the impression you've had all along?
Well, yes, I think that's correct. It's not coming in a vacuum. The people criticizing the index of race law are the same people generally who used to criticize the Institute of Race Relations because of its kind of historical non-racial perspective. Non-racialism in South Africa has been, it's probably more contentious today than it used to be during the 1980s and 90s, when it was seen as the obvious default opposition to racialized discrimination in South Africa. But since then, when the IRR continued, as it had before apartheid ended, after apartheid, the IRR said, listen, we now have a constitutional democracy. We have in section 1B of the Constitution a clear and overriding dedication to non-racialism, and we are erring. We are erring by not making this a legal reality. We are adopting race-based policies. The IRR has said that for many years, and these critics have always taken issue with the IRR saying that. And because the IRR has now published a index of race law, these people's criticism has very kind of effortlessly shifted over to using that as another bludgeoning stick for the IRR. Now, I think recently Donald Trump tweeting about race laws and Elon Musk tweeting about race laws have also caught the attention of other critics who simply want to be seen to be disagreeing with Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and they are, for lack of a better word, they're contrarians. And because Elon Musk said, "Wow, look at this," they must say, "Oh no, but you're spreading misinformation." Well, because you're Elon Musk. The reality is very few people, very few critics. I must say that the response to the index of race law in general has been one of gratitude, of thank you for giving us this information. But of the critics, mostly it's been very little engagement with the substance of what is occurring. And I mean, you're legally trained. I'm legally trained. I'm more kind of working in the policy space. But one of the key rules of working in this space is that the intentions behind the policy, they're relevant to some degree, but they are not as relevant as how it plays out in practice and what the nature of the policy itself is. It doesn't really matter that you have good intentions, because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And the criticisms of the race law index takes this very key principle, I would say, in policy analysis, in legal analysis, and does away with it kind of by default. You say that, no, we must only look at the intention of the law. And because these race laws, the post-1994 race laws, have good intentions, that necessarily means that these are not race laws. Somehow, by some feat of magic, a parliamentarian, a member of parliament's intention, has somehow sapped the racial nature of the provision of its racialness, which is absolutely a bizarre thing for them to submit, but that has been the thrust of the criticisms of the index of race law, at least the formal kind of written rebuttals and debunkings, so-called, been almost exclusively, well, these are well-intended laws, and therefore they cannot be race laws.
So, as an individual, what do you want? Do you want a society that is race neutral, or do you want a society where there are certain racial considerations to adjust and fix historical wrongs?
I think historical wrongs are fixed in ways that are non-racial. I think we've seen this around the world. I think we've seen what works and what doesn't. I think that there is a significant conceptual error in repeating the thing that you're trying to fix in your solution. I think that there's something necessarily wrong with that. If you go into,
you cannot use racism to fix racism.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's such a bizarre thing that people think that undoing something bad means you have to repeat the bad thing, which is no, you have to stop doing the bad thing. The reason we opposed that thing was because it was a bad thing, and therefore we must do a good thing. And the good thing is necessarily to not repeat the bad thing. And we see what works around the world. If you look at all the countries that are prosperous today, that's from Asia to South America to North America to Europe. Those are the countries that do not have governments that intervene in this way and in many other ways in the commercial and civil affairs of their societies. All the successful countries in the world, with very few exceptions, are countries that have embraced a free society, free enterprise, individual liberty, private property rights, and so forth. And countries that went the opposite way, countries that have created regimes of discrimination aimed against sections of their populations, countries that have adopted extractive confiscatory policies, countries that kind of implement relatively authoritarian regimes upon the autonomous interests of their citizens. Those are the countries that do very badly. Again, there are some exceptions. The People's Republic of China is a very good example of a complicated case, let's put it that way. But in general, Venezuela is at the bottom of the list of successful countries. Zimbabwe is at the bottom of the list of successful countries. And on the flip side of that is you have countries like the United States, you have countries like Singapore, you have so on, countries that emphasize, and in Singapore's case, they might actually maybe even go a bit too far. And that's, they say that if you take race into account, we're actually going to punish you. They have very strict laws against racialization, which I would even say maybe they're taking it too far. But again, it's the absence of racialization that works, and it's not the case that South Africa has to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to ask ourselves, how do you solve unemployment? Unemployment has been solved around the world. We just have to do those things. We don't have to ask, how do you restore land that has been taken from people that have been dispossessed? We even got the answer ourselves. In 1996, Parliament adopted the Restitution of Land Rights Act, a perfectly justifiable piece of legislation that says that if you go to court and you prove that your ancestors were dispossessed of their land, you are allowed to get that property back or to take financial reparation, which most people, by far 90% of beneficiaries, have chosen. And that's the right answer. That's how you do it. It's an individualized case-by-case approach. So we know how to solve the problems, but the rent-seeking extractive class in our society wants easy answers. They want politically expedient answers, and that is, of course, to racialize. It's a dividend. It's something that keeps on paying politically. So that's a problem, and the IRR has always stood against that. The Free Market Foundation has stood against that since 1997, since 1975, 50 years of standing against this kind of collectivistic approach that just does not work.
Yeah, I was wondering how you reconcile working for the Free Market Foundation, which emphasizes the individual access to market, protecting the individual, and then focusing and paying attention to race laws, which look at communities. From our conversation, I've realized you worked at the Institute for Race Relations before coming over to the Free Market Foundation.
Yes, yeah, and we're in the fortunate position that these two institutions share the same values. Both are classical liberal institutions. They emphasize individualism, the liberty and dignity of the individual, and everything that kind of both institutions do is premised on that. Even the index of race law, which is to say that there is this body of law that stretches from 1910 that interferes with the individual. In the past, if they were non-white, today largely if they are white, that interferes with the individual. By what reason? By only the reason of their birth. They were born with this skin color or that skin color, which is a difference in melanin content, and that is now a burden or a benefit in some cases that they must carry as a result of legal writ. Now, that's a problem to us because our normative vision of society is that as far as the state is concerned, everyone within its jurisdiction must be regarded simply as individuals. If you want to kind of collectivize people as a private citizen or as a private association, that is your business. We're not paying you tax money to do that. You can do that. But the state certainly is not allowed to do that. So both organizations, the FMF and the IRR, are fiercely committed to liberal non-racialism. And the index of race law is just an outgrowth of this to inform South Africans, to inform the world that there is still a body of race law in South Africa.
Yeah, let's go back in time. During the apartheid regime, was it a socialist regime or a capitalist one, free market? And how do you compare that with the current regime?
So, yeah, I mean, that's a big question. That's a complicated question. I'm not sure that I necessarily have the right answer. But what I can say is that it certainly was not a free market regime in the sense that we would say as classical liberalism. The apartheid regime, I would say, was socialist in a sense, but not in a Marxist sense. It was very anti-Marxist, very anti-Bolshevik, but it was certainly socialist in the sense that it saw a role for the state in promoting the collective well-being of groups that are kind of defined by something resembling class, and in this case it was race. So in 1921, I think, the National Party, which was ultimately responsible for apartheid, joined in a pact government. It was called the pact government with the South African Labour Party. And they did that because they opposed the what they considered the capitalist English interests represented then by Jan Smuts's South African Party, which ultimately became the United Party. So the National Party had a history, and this was later repeated really by D.F. Malan, who was the first National Party prime minister who established apartheid in 1948, he said that the days of capitalism, he said this in 1948, a bizarre thing to say then, that the days of capitalism are over. And in the course of him saying that, he meant that we have to have an involved state that looks after the interests of its constituency. And in the case of the National Party, that was the white electorate. So the National Party was not capitalist, very explicitly so. It gets complicated in the 1980s. Then the National Party was in its, you can say, in its reformist phase. When Pierre Botha became the prime minister, he was of a new breed, I would say, of National Party leaders. Still racist, of course, but very much dedicated to winding down apartheid. And in the course of the 90s, the apartheid government spoke a big game about we support free enterprise, and they also said that we support non-racialism. They started saying this in the late 80s as they began undoing many of the apartheid laws. So then you can say, sure, because of the Reagan and Thatcher era, some of that spilled into South Africa, and also you had some privatizations and so forth. But at its base, the National Party was not a capitalist party, and South Africa was certainly not a capitalist state. It was very much an interventionist state, and the Index of Economic Freedom recorded from the 1970s, you can see that South Africa wasn't one of the top free markets in the world. Now, that's pre-1994. Post-1994, we had a small window, I would say, of an attempt at capitalism. The 1990s under the ANC, the government produced many white papers in electricity, I think, in agriculture, where they said the problem in South Africa, and they were right, the problem in South Africa is that the state has applied a too heavy hand on the economy. We need economic growth that only a free market can unleash so that we can create jobs. We need to privatize Eskom, which by that time they already saw the writing on the wall that something load shedding, rolling blackouts are going to start occurring because the state isn't responding as dynamically to a growing population and to a growing economy as the private sector would. So the ANC got that right in the 1990s to some degree. There were some exceptions, but they had that mentality right. But then from the early 2000s, and then specifically from the end of the 2000s with the Jacob Zuma era, the ANC took on a very explicitly socialistic perspective. It had always been, since the 1960s, a Marxist-Leninist organization on paper, but it's kind of suspended that on pragmatic considerations in the 90s, but it recommitted to its so-called national democratic revolution from the 2000s onwards. And today, as we sit in 2025 South Africa, I would say that our state posture, this isn't reflective of the policy environment yet, or the legal environment yet, but the ruling elite's posture is very much that of a socialist elite that seeks to confiscate property, to nationalize property in some circumstances, and to bring about a far, far greater degree of government control over the economy. It cannot happen because the state is bankrupt. It cannot happen because the state is incompetent, and it cannot happen because the state is corrupt. But the state wants that to happen. That is its dream. That is its ideal. But in practice, it's not going to happen. And I think we should all just thank God for that.
I'm trying to weave in the winding down of the apartheid regime and then the ANC appetite for socialism. When the apartheid regime was winding down and desocializing, was it because they foresaw that the government was going to transfer to blacks, and then they wanted to ensure that they would control the economy while the blacks would control the political power?
So I can't say with any certainty what their intentions were. On paper, what their manifest intentions were, that they wanted to normalize South Africa's position in the world. They recognized that South Africa had become something of a rogue state, and they felt that this was a problem and that they were then winding down a lot of these laws. They said as well that the free market system is more efficient. They started accepting this logic on paper in the 1980s. And that this was kind of what they wanted to do. There were some, of course, that said that on a moral basis they had to do this, that what has happened to the black majority in the past was wrong, and that had to change. And so this is what they said, but I can't say what they really wanted to do or what they really meant. Now, the thing you said about controlling the economy versus controlling the political system, I mean, that's a very common trope, I guess, in South African discourse, and I think it has to be rejected completely, because there's no, I would say, there's no clear distinction between what is economic power and what is political power. The reality is that in 1993, when the interim constitution was adopted by the outgoing tricameral parliament, South Africa became a democracy, and then that meant public policy and economics became democratized. So if the state wanted to nationalize everything, it could do so within, I would say, unfortunately, very generous constitutional protections that would have enabled it to do so anyway, because it ultimately got away with doing that. With water, with minerals, it nationalized those resources within the context of the constitution. So it's not that there was some wall that the National Party succeeded in building that somehow kept the ANC from doing what apparently it needs to do to transform the economy. That's simply not true. What happened, in fact, is that Nelson Mandela and many others in the ANC of the 1990s, and I would say probably still a few people in the ANC today, understand that if you confiscate property at a small scale or at a large scale, you kill investor confidence. It's as simple as that. No one is going to invest in your country if they think that one day their property might just be taken from them for some political reason. They understood that you can't do that. You have to have a functional, growing economy where there's stability, and you can't have stability amidst populist, socialist interventions like that. And that, I guess, that posture has stuck around to a large degree in the ANC thereafter. It would be very difficult for someone to work, for instance, in the Department of Finance, to see that tax revenue is going down, to see investment is going down, to see fixed capital formation is going down, and then to countenance something like, let's have this confiscation, let's have this overregulation of the economy amidst this decline of economic well-being. So it's not about a conspiracy, a white conspiracy to retain control of the economy. White South Africans have zero political power today. None. Nothing. They have influence, they have no power. And the result of that is that the white South Africans cannot stop what the ANC wants to do as a democratic government. There's other considerations, of course, about what the government is able to pull off. I alluded to this a few minutes ago. The government has paralyzed itself through corruption. The government has paralyzed itself through inefficiency and incompetence. We have some really stupid people working in our government. And our government has paralyzed itself with bad policies that have taken away a lot of money and resources out of the state's war chest. So yes, now the government can do less than it could have done in the past, but that is not because of some kind of conspiracy or cabal. That is the government has agency, our political class has agency, and the ruin it has wrought on itself and now increasingly on South African society is of its own making.
Thank you. Let's talk about the Black empowerment laws. Did you classify that as a race law?
The Black empowerment laws, yes, absolutely, yeah. So I would say there's probably two big Black empowerment laws that kind of are very notable. That's the 1998 Employment Equity Act, that is workplace affirmative action, and then it's the 2003 Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, that is about transforming ownership and share ownership in the economy. And also you have the Competition Act and so forth. All of those have explicit racial provisions. So they don't kind of quibble around. They say that a person's race is operationalized in law for these purposes. So they are very clear about the fact that they are race laws. And it would have been simply an error to not classify them as race laws. Again, one might say that those are justified laws, and many people do say that. And so that's an argument that can be had, but they are still race laws. Justified or unjustified, they are race laws.
I want us to talk a little bit about this, but my question about justified race-based laws that seek to correct the wrongs of the past is always, where do we draw that line that we have already corrected the wrongs of the past and we can then normalize society and make sure that laws become race neutral? Is it possible that those who argue for the justified laws argue also for that time when they'll draw that line to say, okay, fine, we are now at the point where the races have been balanced? Do you find that in the arguments?
No, unfortunately not. So that would have been, and many people on my side have made this concession in the past. I haven't made this concession, but they have said that if at the end of apartheid we told each other that for the next 20 years we're going to have an allowance for this thing, or the next 40 years or the next 50 years, whatever, pick an arbitrary number, we're going to do this very much race-based redress of the past, and then when that moment is reached, it's over. We're now done, we've had a good push for it, and now we are a non-racial society with a non-racial political environment. That concession from people on my side has been made. They would have been willing to accept that. On the other side, no. That principle has never been accepted, and I don't even think it's been floated. So the government has said, and the government's intellectuals have said very clearly and very explicitly, that you cannot put a timeline on fixing the imbalances of the past. Of course, what they're doing is they want to milk this thing forever. That is what they are concerned about. But of course, there are many ways to have done this in a far more sensible way. One of those is when it comes to land, for example. It's very simple. You should have a principle that if a land claim has been successful and the property was now given to the people from who it was dispossessed many years ago, or they chose to take financial reparation, that land must be regarded as out of bounds. It's now empowered land. It's redressed land, and therefore you cannot go back and redistribute that land again or restitute that land again, because it's already happened. Now, that's a very simple principle that this government refuses to accept. According to it, if it wants to expropriate the same piece of land over and over and over again for whatever public interest reason, it wants that power. It wants that power very dearly. So, no, I think the question you're asking alludes to something very sensible, very obviously necessary, to say that this cannot be something that carries on forever and ever. Because, of course, history has happened. The reality is that you cannot roll back history. It doesn't matter what you do in your kind of policy today. In the United States, the richest, most powerful country in the world, they still remember, of course, their kind of history as a colony. They had a war of independence from Britain. They still have monuments. They still have, there's always going to be remnants of a colonial past of whatever nature. There's always going to be that. So you cannot undo it entirely. There's no reset button. God didn't give us a reset button for a society. So you have to make the best with the circumstances that you're dealt, and you have to do what I guess experience and history has shown us to be possible. What is possible? Solving poverty is possible. It is something that many countries in the world have done very successfully. Ending poverty can be done. Ending inequality. Now it starts to get difficult. Can you end inequality? Because how do you do that? How do you end the fact that between two people or two groups, there will always be differences that might, yes, result from historical injustices, of course, but also results from choices in the here and now. You cannot, in my view, you cannot solve inequality. It is an insoluble problem. What you can do is you can solve poverty. You can redress, you can restitute property that has been dispossessed in the past. It's a tangible thing that you can quantify and you can do. And then you have to be happy with what you're left with. And that will be more than enough, I would say. If South Africa frees its market, if South Africa adopts a pro-property, pro-business, not pro-corporatist rent-seeking, but pro kind of small business, pro-entrepreneurial policy regime, we will solve poverty in this country. We will create wealth that has never been seen, and if the likes of which has never been seen before. And we will be happy with that. We will be very happy with that, just as all these successful post-colonial countries are happy with being prospering, large, strong economies.
Is there any political party competing for power that is advancing a free market economy in South Africa?
Yes, sure. On paper, yes. So there's the Democratic Alliance is historically our liberal pro-enterprise party. Then you have other parties like the Action South Africa, Herman Mashaba's party. It's a smaller party. You have the Inkatha Freedom Party. It's historically a Zulu-based party in KwaZulu-Natal. That's been a pro-free enterprise party. The African Christian Democratic Party has some free enterprise principles. So there is a wide variety of parties that say that this is what they want. As a policy analyst, as someone who kind of is non-partisan, but certainly involved in the broader political context, I must confess that I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that any of them actually take seriously the principle of a free enterprise system. Because you can, when you speak to these people, you immediately see that they accept some of the premises that the ANC and the Economic Freedom Fighters, the big communist party in South Africa, and the kind of tribal MK party, which is also very kind of left of center, far left as far as economics goes. You can see that even the pro-enterprise parties accept some of the premises. And one of those premises, for instance, which is often unstated, but it kind of underlies all policy, is that poverty in South Africa is a default. This is something that is just part of what it means to be South Africa. And this will always be there. And because it will always be there, we always need the state to be providing this massive welfare state, this massive extractive welfare state of grants and all these things. And all these parties accept that in principle, when in fact, if they truly were committed to a free enterprise system, if they actually trusted the logic of the market system that they claim to support, they would understand that if you go through, I would say a generation or even less than a generation of good free market policy, a state that takes its hands off and says, go for it, then that solves poverty. That solves poverty. It doesn't, there's nothing inherent about South Africa that says we have to be this poor kind of this country of this mass of poor people. There's nothing default about that. That is a policy choice. It is a policy choice for us to do that. And if we just decide to take a hands-off approach to the economy, the much dreaded laissez-faire works. It works, and it works in practice. And if we do that, and if the parties actually believed in that, then they would see that it works, and they wouldn't have to accept these unacceptable premises that the ANC lays out for them.
I agree that the laissez-faire market works despite its own shortcomings. It's the best that we need, especially across Africa, to let the economy work for itself and provide what we need. Because we cannot continue looking at the causes of poverty. We need to start looking at solutions to poverty. And that comes with creation of wealth. If we don't create wealth, we don't create property, we will not come out of poverty, because once wealth regenerates, gives us that momentum to keep going and creating for ourselves.
Absolutely.
So I wanted us to look at the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act of 2003, which you are classified as a race-based law. Since 2003, has anyone taken time to evaluate its impact on the Black race to see if this law has actually empowered Blacks as intended?
So it's been I guess it's been difficult to do that because it's very difficult to draw a line between the policy that's stated in that law and a given Black individual who is either still poor or is now super wealthy. That individual is not going to say that I am wealthy because this law has made me wealthy. They will, and they should, say that I worked hard for what I have and I am here based on merit. That is what any self-respecting human being would say. And it's very unclear for people who remain poor whether they are poor because of that policy. So it's a very difficult exercise, but the Institute of Race Relations' the Institute of Race Relations' head of policy research, Dr. Anthea Jeffrey, she wrote a book, BE Helping or Hurting, I think in 2007, late 2000s, and she kind of went deep into this question. The Free Market Foundation is currently engaged in research on that question. Very difficult to quantify. But from all of the research that has been done, and I think the Black Business Council has admitted to this, the government in various forms has admitted to this, and that is that BE has benefited a tiny elite of Black industrialists and political associates, rather than being broad-based as it claims to be. It has not benefited the masses of Black South Africans, because instead it has been used. So let's take a step back. BE sets aside, or it qualifies, meritocratic considerations. In any commercial or market-based environment, when you are a businessman or a board of a company or a shareholder, what you want, rightly, is profit maximization, because profit is a proxy for development. If you are doing very well as a company, it means you are selling a lot of products. It means you are developing your company infrastructure. Profit is a good proxy for development and kind of economic development in general. So if you're a business owner, if you're a board member, if you're a shareholder, you make commercial decisions based on that. What is going to make you the most money? What is going to contribute to your business's long-term sustainability? Now, suddenly there is this new thing the BEE Act, suddenly you have to make decisions based on race. You have to now qualify every commercial decision that you make, because the BEE Act covers many kind of areas. It covers your suppliers. Who are your suppliers? It covers your board, who is in control of your board. It covers your shareholding. So whenever you make any kind of economic decision, you have to take into account what is your BEE score going to be, what is the identity of the people you draw into your company going to be. These are not commercial considerations. These are ultimately political, identitarian considerations. Now, how has that been exploited under the BEE Act? The political class has tried to make that easy for businesses, and that is that there are prominent Black individuals in South Africa, usually close to the ruling party, who make themselves available to be appointed to big company boards, who make themselves available to become large shareholders of companies' BE shares, and that is kind of how it's played out. It is not a coincidence, and I say this really with all due respect to them. I think many of these are good businessmen as well, but it is no coincidence that the wealthiest Black South Africans have some kind of relationship with the ANC. That is not a coincidence. It is probably quite natural, given the intentions really of the BEE Act. I mean, it's a government policy that and many people at the time sold it as creating a class of Black industrialists, and that has happened. We have Black industrialists in South Africa now. Many of our biggest companies are Black owned. One of our biggest news channels, ENCA, E-News Channel Africa, is a Black owned company. So this has not led to what they often criticize laissez-faire economics for, a trickle down effect. It has not happened. The Black majority is still very poor. It is still very poor in general. Uber wealthy Black individuals that have been created as a result of non-commercial considerations in commercial decision making. Now, in the absence of the BEE Act, there would have, I think, and we submit as free market advocates, a far broader based empowerment of South Africa, because there would have been job creation. We have the highest formal rate of unemployment on the planet, in the world. South Africa has the highest formal rate of unemployment in the world. Having a free market policy environment would have led to job creation at a massive scale. That would have empowered ordinary Black South Africans who are, to a very large degree, languishing in poverty right now. And of course, it would have led to many Black South Africans being appointed on merit, of course, into these companies. Because again, when you make in a business, you want to make money. And there are many millions of competent, skilled Black South Africans in this country who will be appointed and who will find jobs based on merit. The white minority is too small to hog the jobs. And this is something that people often miss. They have this idea that without these laws, like all the CEOs will be white, all the CFOs will be white, all the CTOs will be white, the boards will be white. There aren't enough of us. There are not enough of us. So no, I think from the available evidence, and there's still a lot of work to be done, it is clear that there's nothing broad-based about Black economic empowerment. It is a tool that has been used to empower a tiny minority, and I think at the expense of the...
I have the Constitution here, and I have on self-determination, but we've spoken enough. I'll let you go rest, but we need time to get a part 2 of this so we can get into more detailed conversation. I like to discuss these legal issues with a legal mind so that we discuss them from a perspective that is easy for any person to understand, because there are certain intricacies that are hidden behind the text, and non-legal minds will not see those very clearly. When we discuss them with somebody trained in law, it's easier to help the viewers understand where the law is coming from and the intentions behind the law, the possible consequences of the letter of the law.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll let you go. And if you have any last word for the viewers, I'll be very happy if you can give them, but then promise them that you are coming back.
Yes, no, thank you, Baron. I'm very keen to come back. I've had a lot of fun in discussing these things with you. It's nice to go deep every once in a while, so let's do it again. Last words from me. I'm very active in the policy space, so I encourage your listeners to follow me on my social media platforms. I think start at my website. That's martinvanstaden, all one word, .com. Follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. That is Martin_ASFL. And also please follow the work of the Free Market Foundation. That's freemarketfoundation.com. And also the Institute of Race Relations. That is IRR.org.za. And of course, where we began the discussion, the Index of Race Law. Nothing is hidden. It's all available at our website on racelaw.co.za. So there's a bunch of links to stay up to date with what we're doing, what I'm doing, and I'll be happy to chat about some of those things with you in the future again.
Thank you so much. All these links will be in the description of this video, so you can go there and get them, and I'll distribute the video on our YouTube channel and our X space also. Have a great day. Dear viewers, thank you for watching this in-depth conversation. We hope you learned a lot, especially about the free markets, what Africa needs, and what we need to move the continent forward. Thank you, and see you next time. I have been your host, Ngalim Bernard, and kindly like, subscribe, and share this so that others may view and have an understanding of what is happening around our continent.